I have always been a loner. For the past 10 years, I've spent almost every vacation doing solo backpacking trips deep into the wilderness. I'm talking about places where cell service doesn't exist, and if you get hurt, nobody is coming to save you. I loved that feeling of total isolation. But after what happened 3 years ago, I haven't stepped foot in a forest since, and I never will again. It was late October. I had driven 5 hours out to the Black Ridge Mountains. My plan was simple: park my truck at the edge of the state lines, hike about 10 miles completely off trail, and camp in the deep woods for 3 days. Just me, my tent, and nature. For the first day, everything was perfect. The weather was cool, the woods were dead silent, and I hadn't seen a single human footprint. I set up my camp near a small dried-up creek and slept peacefully. But on the afternoon of the second day, everything changed. I was about 12 miles deep into uncharted territory when the sky turned an unnatural, ugly shade of gray. I checked my weather radio, but there was just dead static. Within 20 minutes, the wind started howling. It wasn't just a regular storm. It felt violent. The temperature dropped so fast that I could see my own breath. And then, the rain hit. It was an absolute downpour. My gear was getting soaked, and lightning was striking entirely too close. I needed shelter, and I needed it fast. I was practically running through the mud, desperately scanning the thick trees for a cave or a rock overhang. Just when I thought I was going to freeze out there, I saw it. Through the heavy rain and thick brush, there was a structure. It was a tiny, rotting wooden cabin. It looked ancient, like some forgotten hunter's shack from the 1950s. It was covered in dark green moss and looked like it was going to collapse at any moment. But right now, it meant survival. I pushed through the wet bushes and ran up to the small front porch. I didn't even knock. I just grabbed the rusted metal handle and pushed the heavy wooden door open. I stepped inside, out of the pouring rain, and slammed the door shut behind me. It was pitch black in there. The only light came from the lightning flashing outside the single dirty window. I was shivering violently. I pulled out my heavy-duty flashlight and clicked it on to see exactly where I was. That's when the feeling of relief instantly turned into a cold, sinking dread. The cabin wasn't abandoned. At first glance, the walls were rotting and the floorboards were broken. But in the corner of the room, there was a perfectly clean, modern sleeping bag. On a small wooden table next to it, there were 3 unopened cans of soup and a fresh gallon of water. Someone was actively living here, deep in the unmarked wilderness, miles away from any road or trail. I should have left right then, but the storm outside was raging harder than ever. I figured whoever lived here was probably stuck somewhere else in the rain. I told myself I would just wait out the worst of the storm, leave a $20 bill for intruding, and get the hell out of there. I sat down on the dusty floor, keeping my distance from the sleeping bag. But as my eyes adjusted to the dim light, I started noticing things. Horrible things. I looked at the heavy wooden door I had just walked through. There was no lock on the inside, no deadbolt, no latch. But when I looked closely at the edge of the door frame, I saw a thick, heavy steel chain completely bolted into the wood, designed to lock the door from the outside. Why would a cabin in the middle of nowhere only lock from the outside? You don't build a door like that to keep animals out. You build it to keep someone in. My heart started hammering in my chest. I shined my flashlight around the rest of the tiny room. The walls, they were covered in scratches, deep, frantic gouges in the wood, mostly concentrated around the door and the window. Some of the scratches had dark, dried, reddish-brown stains on them. They looked exactly like fingernail marks. Someone had been trapped in this room, desperately trying to claw their way out. Panic completely paralyzed me. I grabbed my backpack. I didn't care about the storm anymore. I needed to leave immediately. I walked over to the heavy wooden door and reached for the handle. Crunch, crunch, crunch. I froze. The sound was coming from right outside the cabin. Over the sound of the pouring rain, I heard the unmistakable sound of heavy boots walking through the thick mud. Someone was out there, and they were walking straight towards the front porch. I held my breath. I turned off my flashlight, plunging the room into total darkness. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely grip the straps of my backpack. Creak! The wooden planks of the front porch groaned under the weight of someone very, very heavy. They were standing right on the other side of the door, less than 2 feet away from me. I stood there in the pitch black, completely silent, praying to God they would just walk away. For a full minute, there was nothing but the sound of the rain. And then, the door handle started to slowly jiggle. They were trying to get in. I backed away from the door, my heart pounding so loud I swore they could hear it. The handle stopped moving. I thought maybe they had given up. But then I heard a metallic clinking sound. It was the sound of a heavy steel padlock and a chain being wrapped around the outside of the door. They weren't trying to come inside. They had seen my wet, muddy footprints leading up to the porch. They knew I was in there, and they were locking me inside. The reality of what was happening hit me like a freight train. I was locked in the very same room where someone had clawed at the walls until their fingers bled. I didn't wait to find out what they were going to do to me. I grabbed the heavy wooden chair from the corner, raised it above my head, and smashed it directly into the single glass window. The glass shattered outward into the storm. Instantly, from outside the cabin, I heard a deep, furious roar. It didn't even sound funny. I dove through the broken window, cutting my arm on close to the jagged glass. I hit the right note outside, scrambled to my feet, and just ran. I ran blindly through the pitch-dark forest. Behind me, I heard the heavy boots violently stomping through the floor, chasing after me. Whoever this was, they were massive, and they knew these woods better than I did. I didn't use my flashlight. It would only give away my position. I just ran through the storm, getting whipped by branches, tripping over unseen roots, running purely on adrenaline and raw terror. I heard them screaming behind me, a sickening, high-pitched scream that echoed through the trees. I don't know how long I ran. Hours, maybe. I didn't stop until my legs physically gave out and the sun started to rise. I collapsed under a fallen tree and hid there until midday. Miraculously, I found an old logging road that eventually led me back to my truck. I drove straight to the state police. I gave them the exact coordinates of where I parked and the direction I hiked. They sent a search team out the next day. 3 days later, they called me. They found my muddy footprints. They found the area where the storm hit. But they never found a cabin. No broken glass, no chains, no sleeping bag. Nothing. I don't know what I stumbled into in the Black Ridge Mountains. I don't know who was living in that cabin, or who they had trapped there before me. But I do know one thing for absolutely certain. If I hadn't broken that window, I would have never made it out alive. At least that's what I told myself. I thought the nightmare was over when I drove away from those mountains. I thought I had escaped. I was dead wrong. For the first 2 weeks after the incident, I barely slept. Every time I closed my eyes, I heard the sound of those heavy boots in the mud. I kept all my doors locked, all my blinds drawn, and practically jumped at every little noise my house made. But slowly, I started to convince myself that I was safe. I lived hundreds of miles away from the Black Ridge Mountains. There was no way anyone could find me. Then, exactly 3 weeks later, I got a phone call. It was Detective Miller, the officer who led the search team. His voice sounded incredibly tense. He told me that even though they never found the cabin, a couple of hikers had found something else deep in a muddy ravine, right near the area where I had been chased. It was a heavy-duty, waterproof digital camera. The detective said the camera wasn't damaged, and they had recovered the photos. He wanted to email them to me, to see if the camera belonged to me, or if I recognized anything in the pictures. I opened my laptop, my hands sweating, and downloaded the file the police sent. I clicked on the first photo. It was completely dark, taken at night with a harsh flash. But I instantly recognized the bright orange fabric. It was a picture of my tent, my campsite from the very first night in the woods. The camera was angled perfectly through the mesh window. You could see my face. I was fast asleep. Whoever took this was standing inches away from me, watching me breathe. My stomach twisted into a tight knot. I clicked to the next photo. It was a blurry, chaotic picture of the dark forest. But right in the center, running away in pure terror, was me. It was a photo of my back, taken while I was running for my life through the storm after breaking the cabin window. The sick bastard wasn't just chasing me. He was taking pictures of the hunt. I felt like I was going to throw up. My hands were shaking uncontrollably as I clicked to the very last photo in the folder. The blood instantly drained from my face. The last photo wasn't taken in the woods. It wasn't taken in the rain. It was a picture taken at night, standing on a paved sidewalk under a street lamp. It was a picture of my house. The timestamp on the photo showed it was taken 2 days ago. At 3 a.m. He hadn't stayed in the woods. When I ran to my truck that morning, he must have been watching from the tree line. He got my license plate. He tracked me down. Before I could even pick up my phone to call Detective Miller back, the power in my house suddenly went out. Everything plunged into total darkness. My heart stopped. And then, I heard it. Crunch, crunch, crunch. The slow, heavy sound of muddy boots walking up my front porch. I couldn't breathe. I backed away from my desk, staring blindly into the dark hallway leading to my front door. Creak. The wood of my porch groaned under that same terrifying weight. He was standing right outside my front door. I grabbed my phone and dialed 911, my fingers slipping from the sweat. The operator picked up, but I couldn't speak. I just listened to the sounds coming from my front door. The handle didn't turn. He wasn't trying to break in. Instead, over trying to break in. Instead, over the dead silence of my house, I heard a sound that will haunt my nightmares until the day I die. Clink, clink, clink. It was the heavy, metallic sound of a thick steel chain being wrapped around my front porch railing and sliding through the handle of my front door. He didn't want to break in. He wanted to lock me inside, just like the cabin. "Police are on the way, sir! Stay on the line!" the operator yelled through the phone. I didn't wait. I ran to my back door, threw it open, and sprinted into my backyard, jumping the fence and running straight to my neighbor's house. I hammered on their door until they let me in. The police arrived 5 minutes later with their sirens blaring. They searched my entire property, the street, and the nearby woods. But he was gone. The only thing he left behind was a heavy, rusted padlock, sitting perfectly in the center of my front welcome mat. I moved out of that house the very next day. I live in an apartment building now, on the 10th floor, with security cameras and 3 different deadbolts on my door. But even now, whenever it rains, I sit awake in the dark, waiting to hear the sound of heavy boots, because the police never caught him, and I know he's still out there.